Hey everyone, ready to dive into some serious history today? We're tackling Alexander the Great, but trust me, this isn't your average military history lesson.
You got that right. We're going way beyond the battlefield today. This deep dive is about leadership, legacy, and all the intriguing stuff they don't teach you in school.
Seriously. We're talking ancient biographies, historical accounts, even Alexander's Wikipedia page is surprisingly juicy. Did you know he might not have wanted to be buried in Greece at all?
Really? You'd think the king of Macedon would be all about a nice tomb back home, huh?
Right, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's back up to the beginning. Alexander's world, it was shaped by two major forces, right? You've got his dad, Philip II of Macedon, a total military rock star in his own right.
And then there's his mom, Olympias. Now she knew how to play the political game. Talk about a power couple.
She was the one pushing that whole son of Zeus's narrative, wasn't she?
Oh, absolutely. Talk about a confidence boost for a kid, right? But hey, with Philip II as your dad, you kind of had to live up to the hype. Imagine the pressure.
I could barely handle my dad critiquing my cooking, let alone conquering nations in his shadow. Speaking of pressure, you know those stories about Alexander's childhood? Like the time his dad bought him this wild stallion, Bucephalus, that no one could tame.
And Alexander, he sees right through the horse's fear, calms him down. It's that kind of intuition, that connection with animals that would make him legendary.
He rode that horse all the way to India. Can you imagine being a kid and knowing you had to follow in those footsteps?
Yeah, it definitely wasn't your average father-son dynamic.
Yeah.
Plutarch, he's one of our best sources on Alexander, and he suggests there was this deep admiration, but also this intense rivalry between them.
It's like not just ruling a kingdom, but having to outshine a parent who's already a legend. No pressure, right? Oh, and can we just acknowledge for a second that Alexander's tutor was Aristotle? That's like having Einstein teach you algebra.
Talk about an education, and it makes you wonder how much Aristotle's teachings, all that Greek philosophy, how much it stayed with Alexander as he went on to conquer all those different cultures.
Right. Did it make it more open-minded, or was he always seeing the world through that Greek lens? But okay, so we've got the ambitious parents, the legendary tutor, but what about Alexander the man? What was he really like?
Well, we've all seen those busts, right? The strong jawline, the flowing hair. But was that really him or just ancient propaganda?
Yeah, were those accurate?
Actually, Plutarch says that Alexander himself thought the sculptor, Lysippus, nailed it. He even got those little details right, like the way Alexander tilted his head. Oh, and get this. There are accounts describing him as having a pleasant odor.
A pleasant odor. Come on, that has to be ancient PR, right?
It's a weird detail, I know.
Yeah.
But it shows you how people were already building him up, making him out to be almost superhuman, even when he was alive. Like they were trying to create a legend before the legend even began.
Okay, so we've established Alexander was good-looking, well-educated, and maybe even smelled fantastic. But what about his personality? Wikipedia paints him as ambitious and driven, with a super competitive side. Not exactly shocking for a guy who conquered most of the known world.
That competitive fire definitely came from dear old dad. But there's another side of him too, almost a tenderness, especially when it came to his horse, Bucephalus. Remember, this is a horse that no one else could tame.
And Alexander just walks up and calms him down.
Ah.
That takes a special kind of connection, right? I mean, I get along with my goldfish, but this is next level.
It wasn't just luck. Plutarch describes how Alexander sensed the horse's fear of its own shadow and repositioned him. He had this incredible intuition for understanding what made others tick, even animals.
Which is interesting because understanding people is a key part of leadership, wouldn't you say? And once he becomes king, he's not just leading Macedonians anymore. He's got this vast, diverse empire to manage.
Exactly. And this is where Alexander's leadership gets really intriguing. He knew that ruling this massive empire meant adapting to different cultures, building alliances, and frankly, playing the political game.
Like when he started adopting Persian customs, right? Wikipedia mentions this caused some serious side-eye from his fellow Greeks.
Oh, absolutely. The Greeks were not happy about Alexander embracing things like proskynesis, that's the custom of bowing down before the king. They saw it as something you'd only do for a god, and here's Alexander, a Macedonian king, demanding the same.
I can see why they were a bit miffed. So was this Alexander getting a little full of himself?
Not necessarily. It was a calculated move. See, by adopting certain Persian customs, he was showing respect to the Persian elites who held significant power in the empire. It was a way of solidifying his rule and ensuring a smoother transition of power.
So more strategic genius than egomania.
Exactly. But even the most brilliant strategist faces challenges. Alexander had to deal with plots and rebellions throughout his reign, even from people he considered close.
The story of Clitus the Black comes to mind. Here's a guy who literally saved Alexander's life in battle. And what happens? Alexander kills him during a drunken argument.
It's a tragic example of how even great leaders have flaws, and those flaws can have devastating consequences. Alexander's temper was legendary, and in this case, it cost a loyal friend his life.
It makes you think about the whole nature versus nurture debate. Was Alexander destined for greatness, or was it those intense family dynamics, the pressure to live up to his father's legacy, that fueled some of those darker impulses?
It's a question historians are still grappling with. And it wasn't just external threats he had to deal with. Remember his mother, Olympias. She and Antipater, Alexander's regent back in Macedonia, were constantly at each other's throats. Imagine getting letters from your mom complaining about your co-ruler while you're off conquering the Persian Empire. Talk about stressful.
That's some next-level family drama. It's easy to forget that behind the conquests and legends, Alexander was dealing with some very human problems. But ultimately, he's remembered for his impact. So, how did he change the world?
Well, besides the whole conquering most of the known world thing, Alexander's legacy is intricately tied to the spread of Greek culture, what we call Hellenization.
And he wasn't exactly subtle about it, right? I mean, founding cities all named Alexandria is like the ancient equivalent of putting your name on a skyscraper.
It wasn't just about ego. These cities, strategically placed throughout his empire, became vibrant centers of trade, learning, and cultural exchange. Think of Alexandria in Egypt, still a major city today.
It's amazing to think its founding is tied to this one guy from centuries ago.
It highlights the lasting power of cultural influence. And here's something else that might surprise you. Alexander wasn't just a conqueror, he was a bit of a history buff himself. He deeply admired Cyrus the Great, the founder of the very Persian Empire he'd conquered.
Wait, he admired his enemy? It's not something you see every day.
There's a story about Alexander visiting Cyrus's tomb and finding it in a state of disrepair. He was furious. He ordered the guards punished and the tomb restored. It showed a different side to the conquering hero, a respect for past greatness, even if it belonged to a former foe.
He was full of contradictions, wasn't he? A conqueror with a soft spot for history, a brilliant strategist prone to fits of rage. It makes his story all the more fascinating. But it couldn't last forever, right? What happened after Alexander's death?
Well, his death is almost as shrouded in mystery as his life. He died suddenly at the young age of 32. Fevers, poison, maybe even typhoid have all been suggested as possible culprits.
Wikipedia mentions there were whispers of poison even back then.
It's not hard to imagine. After all, with an empire that vast and power up for grabs, there were bound to be those who saw Alexander's death as their opportunity.
And what about his empire? Did it crumble without him?
Well, Alexander didn't have any direct heirs, which created chaos. His generals, known as the Diadochi, ended up fighting over the remnants of his vast empire.
So all that conquering, all that empire building, and it basically falls apart as soon as he's gone.
It happens, right? Even the biggest empires, they're often built on shaky foundations when you really get down to it.
It's kind of a reminder that it's not about how big your kingdom is or how long you're in charge. It's the impact, right?
Yeah.
And that takes us back to that little mystery we started with. Where did Alexander the Great, conqueror of worlds, where did he want to be buried?
Yes. Not with dear old dad in Macedon, even though that was the royal tradition, right?
Exactly. What were his big plans for the afterlife? Did he have a pyramid picked out? A golden mausoleum?
Well, some folks, they think he might have had his eye on Siwa Oasis in Egypt. Remember, that's where he got the whole son of Amun-Ra thing going.
Oh yeah, the Egyptian god connection. It's like he was all about bridging cultures, wasn't he?
Yeah.
A unifier, not just a conqueror. But wait, didn't he actually die in Babylon?
He did, and that's why others think maybe that's where he ended up. The truth is, like so much about Alexander, it's still a bit of a head-scratcher. But that's part of the fun, right?
Totally. We're like history detectives, piecing together the clues. We've got his battle plans, his personal letters, stories from people who knew him, even his Wikipedia page.
Yeah, there's still so much we don't know. Did he really believe he was descended from gods,
Yep.
Was he a visionary leader? Or just a really successful tyrant?
Or maybe, and this is usually how it goes, maybe he was a little bit of both. I mean, nobody's all good or all bad.
Right. Exactly. And that's what makes history so interesting, isn't it? It's not just dates and names in a textbook. It's about people. Complicated people. Even the most famous figures, the greatest conquerors, they were human too.
We've explored Alexander's world, dug into his leadership style, tried to untangle his legacy, all those things that make him such an enduring figure. And if you're anything like me, you're probably ready for another deep dive.
Absolutely. Maybe you're thinking about Hellenistic art now, or the spread of Greek philosophy across the ancient world. There's a whole universe of knowledge out there.
So keep those questions coming, folks. Keep exploring. And remember, a little curiosity could go a long way. We'll see you next time.